Thank you very much, Jim, for that introduction. Like Jim says, I work with NHS Health Scotland and I lead a programme of work around child poverty. I also chair the group of national partners who are in place to support the local development of action reports. These are the main players here that are on the group, and hopefully you'll be familiar with most of them here. And our purpose really is to coordinate the effort and resources that we have in place to support boards and local authorities in their efforts to reduce poverty through the production of the action reports. So what Hanna and I thought we would do in this particular session would provide some of the reflections and perspectives from the first round of action report development. And we're going to draw out some of the achievements and positive developments that we've seen, as well as some of the challenges that have been identified as well. So we'll be drawing on insights from contact that we've had with many of you over the last year, and more recently the interviews that we've had with particularly the local authority leads, along with their NHS partners, and also draw from the session that we hosted with the NHS child poverty leads just only a few weeks ago. So what you've shared with us have been examples of what have been the enablers and barriers to this work, but also suggestions for support going forward. So really want to thank you all for your contribution to that and speaking so candidly to us. What I'm going to say is going to be completely anonymous, so I'm not going to name, shame or even promote anyone in the talk, but certainly it was really valuable exercise for us. So as a National Partners Group, we're going through the reports at the moment. We've been tasked with taking out a clutch of reports each, and we're really drawing out what the good practice seems to be, what areas there might be for further development. And really it's helping us to identify areas that could be possible to scale up across Scotland. So hopefully you'll hear more about what we're planning to do over the next few months. Because one of the aspirations of the whole purpose of having a local duty and having the production of these annual reports is to prompt a step change in action. So we also would like to come to an understanding of what that exactly step change might mean. So as you will be aware, we've already mentioned that the new Statutory Poverty and Equality Commission has been tasked with undertaking a review and scrutiny of the reports. And we're delighted that Lindsay has been able to join us here today, and she'll touch on what the Commission has planned for that particular aspect of scrutiny and review. So we don't want to preempt any of the outcomes of what the Commission will be finding, but we really want to just kind of stimulate some reflections and discussion and debate today. So I'm going to focus on the really sexy area of relationships, structures and process, and then I'll pass over to Hanna, who will talk about actions, policy and progress. So in terms of relationships, structures and processes, what has the duty resulted in so far as far as we can see? There's absolutely been a far greater prioritisation of child poverty across Scotland. It's a sharper, more focused attention, and the profile has been raised in areas where there was maybe a limited focus before, as well as it's raised the profile again in areas where there potentially was a strong focus already. So it's helped to reinvigorate the local agenda and galvanise efforts. And for some areas in particular where actually you couldn't really talk about poverty, this has absolutely been the key mechanism and platform in which to start having these really important discussions with elected members, other senior leaders at a local level. So it's given them the platform to do that. So I think in that respect that could be regarded as a step change for some. It's been the opportunity to place child poverty within the wider poverty agenda, but also tease out the specific impacts on children and young people as well within that. It's been more integral to the community planning process, as well as other local authority and other NHS council planning processes. There's been a better understanding of child poverty among senior leaders, elected members, and particularly tackling head-on sometimes the confusion or the conflation between the causes of poverty and the consequences of poverty. So there's also been more buy-in at a senior level amongst a range of groups particularly council leaders, NHS chief executives, elected members, and across the community planning partnership, senior leaders as well. And I think crucially what we've seen as well is examples of where actually making the case for funding, or at least making the case for not cuts in funding for child poverty initiatives, or initiatives that would have an impact on poverty in the face of the very difficult budget pressures and reductions that many local boards and authorities are facing. But it does need to be built into the business of the organisation, and it can't just be relying on the commitment of the few, and I would include you guys in this room as well. And it's about how do we maintain the pace that's already been established, maintain that pace, but also maintain that level of buy-in that's really important to keep the profile of child poverty. In terms of partnership working and relationship building, it definitely has been an opportunity to foster new partnerships as well as to strengthen existing ones. And for many of you, you told us that it was an opportunity to go and meet new service areas or other parts of your local system that you know will have an impact across the three drivers. One person described it as getting the tentacles into other areas, which I quite liked, where they hadn't been managed to go in before. And there's also been a multiplier effect, so while the focus has been on child poverty, the increased positive partnership work and relationship building has meant there's been other benefits to other kind of policy areas or implementation areas. The question of where the responsibility, the duty has also been an opportunity to shine light on other initiatives that have a relationship with this agenda around adverse childhood experiences, and also the broader context of health inequalities. Now, by and large, this has been a joint endeavour between boards and local authorities, both driving the approach together. But there are some areas where there definitely needs to be a bit more done about the nature of that partnership and the nature of that joint effort. So we'll look forward to seeing how that progresses over the years to come. In terms of governance and accountability, there's definitely variation in terms of the local approaches to how this has been dealt with. A range of local structures are being used, from children's services planning to anti-poverty groups that have already been set up or newly set up, through community planning, partnership thematic groups. But the question of where responsibility for that leadership and accountability sits, and whether that actually makes a difference to the quality of the report and what is included in that report, is an interesting one, and we can't make any conclusions about that at this stage, but I'm sure a lot of you would be quite interested if there are any things that make a difference to the outcomes. So many areas have established new mechanisms or bolted this on or made it part of an already existing mechanism. And while governance and accountability and sign-off at times have been quite tricky for some areas, and particularly with the timeline for getting it over the line at the end of June, I think there's a recognition that it'll be a bit better this year. They might not be able to overcome the multiple layers of reporting, but at least there'll be identify a track through to streamline the process. And lastly, just around kind of planning approaches, just to note there's 3 areas so far that do have a post which has a dedicated child poverty remit. By and large, everyone else has child poverty tagged or incorporated into already quite a big role for other things. So remits around community planning leads, strategic and corporate planning leads, children's services planning, financial inclusion seem to be kind of the key areas where the posts sit and the responsibility sits. But there's definitely been strong evidence of the use of the 3 drivers to shape action, which is great to hear that message has really hit home, and efforts are now being organised around those 3 drivers. And most areas have gone through that exercise of taking stock of activity, just to say, well, we're actually doing quite a lot, but how much are we doing that hits those 3 drivers? And it's prompted some really helpful discussions, and maybe some difficult discussions about, well, actually this area of work that we've invested in for so long and we've got real commitment to is not going to hit one of these drivers, and whether or not that's something that you continue to do or disinvest in. And certainly the issue around priority groups and the groups that we know that are at higher risk of poverty there's a whole range of questions and discussions around how do we focus on those groups and make a difference there and ensure that we're reaching those groups. And there's a real focus on that raising awareness of child poverty. So the planning approaches have included sessions with community groups, sessions with elected members, and a whole range of other groups to really enforce why this is such a big issue and what we need to do more of. There has been examples of areas working with people who have got lived experience of poverty, but not to a great degree as yet. But a lot of areas have said, well, we've not done much to date, but absolutely for this year and in the coming years we will definitely do some more. So that's good news to hear. In terms of emerging approaches at a regional level, that's something that there are some examples of. The limiting factor there seems to be not the appetite for it, but the resources to do it properly and appropriately. And I think, given we've got a session this afternoon on monitoring evaluation, I think there's a recognition and acknowledgement that more needs to be done around thinking about monitoring and evaluation of actions that are in reports. So I think the support that probably national partners could give on that topic would be really welcome for many areas, and particularly if we could do something at a national level around a set of indicators, for example. But lastly, my last point really would be, I suppose the issue that came through a lot of the discussions was, let's not get too worked up about the bureaucracy of producing a report. It's about the delivery of these actions and the impact that will be achieved through these actions. But clearly the first year is about getting our house in order and getting sorted out and working through the bureaucratic elements. So that's why I focused a bit on that. But we, as national partners, we're committed to considering these things that are coming through, the discussions that we're having with you as we plan together what we'll be doing collectively in our joint work plan in the years ahead. So thank you very much. Hanna?
Thanks, Kerry, and hello everyone. It's lovely to see you all here today. My name is Hanna McCulloch and I'm the National Co-ordinator for Local Child Poverty Action Reports. I've been tasked with trying to give an overview in 10 minutes of what impact on policy the duty to produce these reports under the Act has brought about, and what some of the challenges to that policy change have been. I mean, the question, I suppose, is, has it resulted in the shift in policy that will be required if we're to meet these or to make a contribution to meeting these really ambitious national targets? Having read the reports and spoken to the leads, I would say that there has been significant and meaningful policy changes, and that the groundwork has been laid through the new structures and the processes that Kerry's talked about for that to continue into the future. And the majority of reports do reflect much more than just a mapping of business as usual. They represent considered policy and strategic progress at a really challenging and difficult time, and a huge amount to be proud of. But at the same time, I don't think anybody in this room would suggest that we're anywhere near, we haven't cracked it. We still all have a long way to go. And for me, in terms of trying to conceptualise the progress that's been made in year one, it was helpful to split policy areas into three very imprecise, quite randomly named, any suggestions for better categories? So into three categories. The first one for me is the front runners, and these are policy areas that are well represented in all or almost all of the reports that I've seen. Strong and consistent links can be drawn with the three drivers, and that there are areas that are consistently highlighted by leads as being areas that they're quite proud of their achievement and the progress that they've made in relation to. So things that jumped out when I looked at the reports and spoke to leads were the school clothing grant. That's been mentioned a few times already today, but the commitment to that's really been phenomenal. I mean, a huge, I think 8 local authorities are above the 100. Highland is noteworthy, I think, because it's 140. But across the board, there's really been significant commitment to that. It's not just school clothing grants, free school meals as well, whether that's extending entitlement in some areas, improving delivery mechanisms, innovative approaches to reducing stigma and maximising uptake. There's a real interest and a real engagement around that, and again, it's represented in a lot of the reports, as is tackling the cost of a school day. which again is touched upon in the vast majority of reports. What's quite interesting there is there's a huge differentiation in what tackling the cost of a school day means. In some areas there's been £140,000 invested in reducing the financial barriers to certain subjects. In other areas it's been an effort to train every head teacher to understand the cost of a school day better and to take steps to reduce it. Other areas that jump out as front runners are the maximising uptake of information and advice and benefits. So through active referral, through co-location of advice services in job centres, schools, nurseries, family centres, other places that families frequent. Commitment to the living wage, which has already been talked about. Again, Dundee being the first living wage region, but again, most of the reports make some mention of the importance of public bodies paying the living wage and a commitment to doing that in some way or exploring that in some way in the future. And finally, in relation to holiday provision, and what's particularly heartening in relation to holiday provision is that a lot of the reports detail that they're going to be doing in-depth analysis of the impacts that their model of provision during the holidays is having. So there's a lot happening and a lot of investment and a lot of energy in these areas. I'm not saying anyone should be resting on their laurels in relation to any of this. If nothing else, it's going to be a battle to ensure that these initiatives are funded and supported and prioritised in the future. But I do think we're in a strong position to start exploring the approaches that other areas have taken, comparing which approaches are effective, and really standing on each other's shoulders to make sure that we're making progress and investing in the things that work across the country. Because the expertise, I think it's clear, exists, a lot of it within this room, around how these policy areas can be successful, and we have the tools to share that knowledge through the Knowledge Hub, through webinars, through the events and meetings that will be organised through the coming years. So I would ask that share your expertise via the Knowledge Hub and let the national partners know what you need from us in terms of exchange of knowledge and understanding and that kind of thing. So the second category is the ominously sounding, the names in the shadows. For me, these are examples of policy that are omnipresent in the reports, and by their nature, they make a contribution to tackling poverty. So in my mind, things like childcare and employability, they're in the reports, they're hugely important, and some areas do go into depth about how their work around employability, for instance, is tackling child poverty, is reaching families. That is happening, we're going to hear more about that today. But in a lot of areas, there'll be reporting of how many people have accessed employability services, but less about how many of them were families with children. How successful were those interactions? Were the employment opportunities secured appropriate for parents with children? Was there engagement with employers to make sure that the appropriate opportunities for progression exist? That kind of thing. So really drilling down into these areas, and I think in relation to childcare too, the rollout of the 1140 hours is huge, and it's well represented in the reports, but we all know that's not the only game in town. It's about what about children aged 0 to 2, it's about what about school holidays, what about after school. So these are a huge amount to be optimistic about, but a huge amount more drilling down to do as well. And I think the national partners can help again by sharing good practice, and also I think trying to bring together local child poverty leads with the relevant professional networks, whether that's Slade for economic development, ALICE in relation to childcare, and making sure those conversations are happening. The last category, I'm going to call them the giants. I named them this, but I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce that. So the giants. So things like housing, transport, economic development, they're complex, multi-level fields. They're working to meet a wide range of objectives, and their policy is not necessarily formulated particularly to tackle child poverty, but they have the potential to be game changers in terms of the three drivers and in terms of making a real difference to families. And these were areas that were cited most by leads during that interview process as areas where they would like to do more and they would like to learn more about what can be done and they would like to engage more. So this is going to require discussion at local, regional and national level, and it will require the expertise of people who maybe don't even imagine that they have a place at the child poverty table. But that's not to say there aren't big gains that can be made quickly in relation to transport. There are numerous areas seeking to make school transport more affordable. Others have secured free bus travel for those moving into employment for a month. In other areas, the possibility of car share schemes for low-income families in remote areas is being explored. But on a larger systemic scale, these aren't things that any one area can solve on their own, and no level of government can solve these issues on their own. So it's about how are we making those links and how is that that dialogue ongoing, and it is starting to happen. So in the last few months, for instance, in relation to economic development, inclusive growth, Glasgow City Region hosted an event looking at what the city region could do through its structures and through its spend to tackle child poverty, and there'll be a report on that published soon that will hopefully have implications for economic development and city region structures across the country. Spyro is leading on the development of a transport action learning set, which will bring together local, regional and national policy together with the voices of experience. Poverty and Inequality Commission and Joseph Rowntree Foundation have done a lot of work in the past few years to focus on inclusive growth and also transport. So these discussions are happening, but it's how do we make sure that the local poverty voice is present in those discussions and is heard. And that would be a big challenge in the coming years. I'm aware I'm probably going over time, so I'll try and speed it up a bit. As well as achievements, one of the questions that we addressed with local leads were what were the challenges? And I don't think the responses will be a massive surprise to anybody. It was repeatedly highlighted to Kerry and myself that there's an enormous amount of pressure on very limited resources. But there was also an acknowledgement that it isn't all about money, that existing resources could be spent differently, and evidence that that was starting to happen in some areas. I mean, you just need to look at the front runners and the spend in those. Money is being used to support child poverty initiatives. And local leads also told us that the Fairer Scotland duty and child poverty duty had been important to them, and that they've made a vital difference in protecting services from cuts. So even if they couldn't establish there'd been additional investment, child poverty and the Fairer Scotland duty were a powerful tool for making the argument of leaving effective interventions alone. So, but despite all that, additional resources we're seeing as something that could make a massive difference. Whether that's protecting core services to allow for improvement and development, investing in manpower to drive forward the child poverty work locally, and a lot of people talked about making those links with housing, making those links with employability, really having the energy and the time to do that. A post some people felt would be useful, and I think the most popular sort of suggestion in terms of what would be done with additional resources was investing enough money to invest in the things that we know work, again front runners, or a sort of change fund that could be used by local partners to test what might work, particularly in relation to the big hitters of housing and economic development and employability, and being able to use local discretion about how that was spent. Because what also came across clearly was that while investment in the national, local policies like the financial health check, Money Talk Scotland, and the intensive parental employability support fund were massively welcome, some were concerned that having numerous highly targeted pots of funding wasn't always the best way to ensure a strategic approach and to respond to local needs. And I think that's a conversation that isn't going to end today, that we'll hopefully continue to have over the coming months and years. Another challenge was effective use of evidence. I don't want to preempt what's going to be talked about in the workshops. Recurrent questions are around what do we need to know, what data should we use to understand poverty in our area, how do we know we're addressing it, and how do we plug the gaps. Again, there's a workshop, so I don't want to go into too much detail, don't have time, but there has been some progress made this year. There are really interesting examples of how data and intelligence more widely has been used to understand poverty locally. One of our local speakers is going to be talking about that. So hopefully we can draw on the local reports to inform that discussion. There's also a deep dive, I don't think I'm supposed to call it that, but there's something like a deep dive exercise going on in Inverclyde, which will provide a case study example of this approach and its benefits. And it's basically a range of local and national organisations and services that are going to pool their intelligence and their data to see what more they can learn about child poverty. So I'm sure you'll all be listening to hear what comes out of that with great interest. And in terms of assessing impact, there has been progress this year. The Scottish Government has developed a dashboard of indicators, which will be officially published shortly. And in partnership with Spirey, the Scottish Government will also establish a working group to consider what can be done to ensure optimum use of local information. So in conclusion, it's been a really busy year. I think there's a huge amount that's been achieved across the country. And as we move forward, we'll continue as the national partners to draw as much learning as we can out of the reports. And along with the Poverty and Inequality Commission's findings, we'll do our best to share that with you and make sure that it informs discussions going forward through thematic papers, events, webinars, the Knowledge Hub. But I would say, tell us what you need from us and tell us the best ways of sharing that information, because we're really at your service, and today's a good opportunity to let us know what you need from us.